And welcome to Salon Talks. I'm Dean Obeidallah. Today we have two authors of a great new book out. We have Nancy Isenberg and Andrew Burstein, co-authors of the book The Problem of Democracy, The President's Adams Confront, The Cult of Personality. They're both professors as well at LSU and have written many books on American history and presidents in the past. Nancy and Andrew, great to see you in person. Thanks for coming in here.
Oh, we're happy to be with you.
So let's talk about the problem of democracy, which I have a lot of problems, not with democracy, but with the people who inform and vote in democracies sometimes upset me. But let's talk about, your book is about the two presidents. The second president of the United States, John Adams, and his son, the sixth president, John Quincy Adams. I think more people know about John Adams, John Quincy less so. So let's talk about them before we get into the politics and the problems of democracy as human beings, sort of demystify these figures. So first, John Adams, can you tell us a little bit, just as a human being, about John?
Yes, I think this is one of the things that people forget about the founders. They were politicians, they had enemies, their jealousies, and this is one of the reasons that John Adams is interesting is that he's very open because, I mean, both of them kept detailed diaries. They admitted to their flaws, so there's something endearing about that, unlike Jefferson, who often didn't admit when he sort of got something wrong. But yes, they not only understood that personality was a part of politics, but both of them are interested in the psychology of politics. They really are part of the founding generation who realized that emotions matter, that emotions drive politics, that irrational behavior not only informed when they talked about the fear of the mob, but it also informed elites because he was very aware that behind politics there always was ambition, and ambition would drive politicians. So how do you balance the natural impulse for ambition and its negative side, that the fact that people are grasping and greedy and are going to work for their own interest and not the interest of we the people. Right. So this is where John Adams, I think, is a really interesting character, that he lets it hang out there so you know exactly what he thinks.
And John Quincy
John
Adams.
Quincy. There's a curious parallel or disjunction in that John Adams was riding the circuit as a lawyer. And when his eldest son was born, he was nowhere to be found. He got back when his son was a week old. And John Quincy Adams was absent for all 4 years of his father's presidency, from 1797 to 1801. He was a diplomat serving in Europe. But he also fed his father key information, sources from the higher ranks of the European nobility, and this is the rise of Napoleon, and U.S.-French relations were at a low ebb. So their political relationship kind of reached the highest point when the father was the president. John Quincy Adams, his son Charles Francis, who served the Lincoln administration, wrote in his diary and mused about how his father was such a cold fish. How did he have a political career worth anything? Whereas John Adams had an in for Benjamin Franklin. He thought was way overrated and way past his prime when he was serving America abroad. The two of them ironing out the Treaty of Paris in 1783. And John Adams called Benjamin Franklin the old conjurer, a phony. And John Quincy Adams referred to his main rival, Andrew Jackson, as a barbarian who couldn't spell.
I think it's interesting, the parallels that you document so well in your book between John, the father, and John Quincy Adams, and the commonality in these unique experiences. I mean, obviously both first one-term presidents, neither one got reelected, both lost to arguably more cult of personality type of people, which we'll get into. You know, both lawyers, both argued really infamous cases in a way at the time. I mean, John Adams more so defending the British troops after the Boston Massacre. John Quincy Adams doing something equally, it was noble at the time when John did, but with the Amistad case. And I was so thinking about John Quincy Adams, he loses re-election, then he runs for Congress and serves. I mean, we don't see that today. That level of public service is unparalleled.
17 years from 1830 to his death. He died at his desk in Congress.
No, I mean, and it's something that's never been repeated. And it was really interesting that he did that because, you know, his father starts out in the the Continental Congress. But what's interesting about that, getting to the democracy issue, is that both of them believed that a healthy Congress was essential for democracy. And they also linked it, I mean, this is one of the things I've been saying, that for John Adams, and this is why you can't equate Alexander Hamilton's federalism with John Adams' federalism, is that he believed in the importance of local knowledge, which is usually what the anti-federalists claim to be defending. But he believed in the importance of the town meeting. He believed that essentially, from infancy, he said, you had to be trained to debate, to deliberate, to be able to articulate your interests to your representative.
An informed citizenry.
Sure.
That's what mattered to the founders, the heralded founders we know about. This is the one thing they agreed upon, just, regardless of what the rest of their politics were like, was an informed citizenry, and that the information that they received from their elected congressmen was good information, reliable information. Maybe that sounds a little optimistic, but that was a major matter for them.
What I find really remarkable is in your book, The Problem of Democracy, that the framers really had some problems with democracy at the essence, classical sense of democracy, one person, one vote. Right. And a lot of times we forget in America that our Senate, at its origin, was elected by the state representatives, not by the people.
Right.
And James Madison said at the time it was to protect the people against the transient impressions into which they themselves might be led. And certainly it comes up so much in this book that the concerns of the Adams and others, that Americans are just going to run amok. They're going to be taken by whim and passion and what was going on. Because now I don't know if we're as concerned. I think we hope it self-corrects. But what was going on at that time that made them so embracing of some representative form of democracy, yet at the same time true democracy being concerned about?
They cared most about balance in government. And they exhibited moral courage in that they never aligned with the party themselves. Technically, John Adams was a Federalist, but they stood above party. And parties were being used to, kind of like today, it's a straight vote. What John Adams first foresaw, and this went back to the ancient Roman Cicero, Republican, who was a model of both of theirs, that not only the three branches of government comes from Cicero in ancient Rome, but the idea that the Senate would represent the well-heeled, but that no moneyed aristocracy would be able to dominate, that they would be countered by the democracy, which was lodged in the House of Representatives, the lower house.
No, and this is why he emphasized the importance of checks and balances. We hear that all the time. But essentially, he really believed in the importance of institutional balance because he assumed that fame and ambition was in every person's heart, and that no government structure itself, in a sense, is inevitably going to be perfect. You have to sort of find a way to check what are the natural impulses of humans. And that's what I think is important because, yes, they are concerned, they often equated democracy with mobocracy. Right. So they are afraid, and that's from the classical sense, that the mob will create anarchy. But they were even more afraid of oligarchy. They were more afraid of aristocracies that would be pulling the strings behind what John Quincy Adams would say, the kind of smokescreen of democracy. When democracy is all about having, riotous campaigns and even, nicknames for the candidates. Andrew Jackson has the first full-length campaign biography. And he said that what gets lost through all of the theatrics is what's going on behind the scenes. And what he zoned in on says that the real interests of the Jacksonian Democrats were this alliance between Southern slaveholders and Western speculators. That's where the power was. And it's the aristocracy performing for the masses, but in a sense, the people don't get anything in return.
The context for this fear of mobocracy was the French Revolution.
I was going to ask, was there something going on in the world? And there was, and that's what I was trying to get.
And When John Quincy Adams was in Europe from 1795, he was first appointed by George Washington. And as the minister, we didn't have ambassadors yet, a minister to the Netherlands, where his father had previously served during the Revolution and secured funding for the Revolution. But the French Revolution was unfolding, the terror, the beheading of the king, and Americans, especially the Federalist Party, was concerned that the pro-French enthusiasm in America, belief that whatever happened, the king, okay, get rid of him, as long as the people get to rule. That, and Thomas Jefferson believed, as a prominent figure, Secretary of State, that things would iron themselves out. The Adamses had a different view, and John Quincy was over there and clearinghouse of information. And they had reason to fear. It was kind of like after 9/11, that the panic that set in and the belief that you had to be on your guard, that Americans could be turned against Americans in 1793, 94, 95. George Washington's second term in office was fraught with, John Adams believed that Washington would not have gotten the third term, and that's why Washington so nobly decided to give up the presidency after 2. And it was because the French Revolution divided America into 2 sides, pro-French and pro-British. Where do you stand? And the Alien and Sedition Acts, which is John Adams's presidency's worst moment, were also a result of the tremendous fear of mobocracy, of the French Revolution infecting America, coming to American shores.
And the other thing is that John Quincy Adams, when he observes what's going on in France, and this is what people forget about the French Revolution, is that the French Revolution, after the terror, what happens at the end? Well, Napoleon makes himself into an emperor. And this was almost imitating what had happened in, classical republics, classical governments. The fact that the other extreme is that once you have the imaginary illusion that the people are in charge, they turn around and they elevate their hero into an emperor, which is even more powerful than a president.
Is that, John Adams, in your book you noted that he said there was never a democracy yet that did not commit suicide. Is that what you're talking about, the suicide of a democracy? They would come in, we're going to usher in democratic change, we'll get rid of the monarch, and then we've created a new monarch in a way without a monarchy.
More particularly, what he meant by that statement, and this was in 1814, so he was already an ex-president, what he meant was that when the people exercise power directly, you'll have competition among the people. And there's no level playing field, there's no social equality. So some people will become wealthy and powerful, and then you'll have an aristocracy of wealth. And when you have this inequality, it will lead to possibly either a sort of revolt against those in power, the oligarchy, or the election of some kind of hero, charismatic figure who is going to be a sort of Napoleonic figure. So in history, John Adams noted, and he wrote a lot about and studied deeply world history, there never had been a democracy that did not come to this sort of end.
Yeah, just one more point.
Sure.
The thing that is so important about John Adams' critique is that he put class power at the center of politics. And essentially he argued that it is always going to be a force. You can't assume that class politics are not going to creep into democracies or republics. And I think that, it's again, sort of, he is very focused not only in the passions of the people, but how do you address the inevitable power conflicts that are going to be a part of the political arena. And I think that's the other reason that we need to sort of pay attention to them. We need to sort of remember that politics isn't and shouldn't be. This is one of the other classical quote that I like is what Plato and Socrates said, that you have two options. Either you think you want statesmen who they compared to doctors who give the people the harsh medicine they need, or you have politicians who are like chefs, who are just feeding people, their worst, to sort of indulge their worst appetites. And I think we see this all the time. We see the campaign as a big performance. People talk about likability and charisma, but then they don't care. The policies always get pushed to the side, and they don't care about, well, do you want someone who can actually get something done, get legislation passed?
No, we have questions like, who would you like to have a beer with? Who would you prefer to drive across country with?
Right.
Not
like
whose
who cares?
policy is better. But that's the human. I mean, it really seems that the framers were so weary of political parties for a reason. We look at it now. We see the manifestation, not just now. I mean, Trump is maybe exaggerated bits, but it's been going on now. And they were right. And they were right about being candid and brutally honest about the human ambition and about how people can be manipulated. We've seen it not just now. Not everything is Trump. I know we're going to get to him in a second, but it's not all. We've seen people in past, even Democrats, progressive grassroots activists who are charismatic, who can lead people without policy and lead them with promises of hope and change and things like that. And I like Obama a great deal, but you can see how personality can sell over policy.
The Adamses both were problem solvers. They believed that the purpose of government was to solve problems that would benefit the majority of the people. That's what public service meant. There was no golden age of democracy, as you're speaking to the partisanship of this period. There was no golden age of democracy. There's no make democracy great again, because it was always a street fight, a brawl, and the personalities contesting one another, and the newspapers going after one candidate, on the basis of the most crude, vulgar kinds of slurs. Andrew Jackson was a bigamist. And Andrew Jackson, whose wife, Rachel, died after he was elected, but before he took office, felt that his political opposition had literally caused her to
put her in the grave.
So this was how nasty it was.
And I think that's an important point, that it's not like the founding fathers sat around and had these kind of Cicero-type discussions, although both Quincy and John Adams both love Cicero. And they were like street fighters, and they used the media. Forget Fox News. We're talking about they had their own media outlets in a way that they were bankrolling to say the most scurrilous, outrageous things about their opponents. So, and on some level, when you read The Problem of Democracy and you get a sense of our history, it's almost calming. I'm still freaked out with Trump, I have to be blunt. But what was their concern? We've talked about their concern about democracy and the will of the people. What was their concern about political parties that it would lead America astray, or would it lead people astray? What would happen?
They called political parties factions, and no one wanted to belong to a political party. We said, well, this is the Federalist interest. This is the Republican interest. Because the word party meant faction. It was something like, as democracy provoked anarchy, party, what they called the spirit of party, was a spirit of division. And the Constitution did not recognize the inevitability of organized political parties.
Yeah, the Constitution didn't recognize it, although, as I said, they should have anticipated, because parties existed in Great Britain, and the fact that many of the newspaper people came from, Grub Street in Britain, with all these kind of, for being, using slander as an effective political weapon. And what's interesting about John Adams is he also compared the rise of parties, because he also studied dynasties and dynastic families and the Medicis in Italy. So he also realized that they would use a lot of the same tactics about, even in terms of promoting candidates, like pushing candidates who had a prominent name. He offers this beautiful critique of George Washington. And this is in 1807, this is, well after his presidency. But he highlighted, he talked about the cult of celebrity around Washington, and he said Washington's most important trait was his handsome face. The second was that he was tall, and he was 6'3". And then third was his elegant breeding, and then finally his large estate, that he was wealthy. These are the things that it wasn't Washington's native intelligence that people were responding to, and the fact that his image was everywhere. Everyone knew Washington's face, even, and that's part of the reason he was selected as president.
He didn't even host a reality TV show then. So
exactly.
Let me ask you the question I'm sure everyone's asked you. What would the Adams, who railed against the idea of a cult of personality, who wanted smarter people who would inform an electorate and move them by policy, not passion, what would they think of Donald Trump?
Well, what they hated most about the flaws in America's republic was the prospect of ignorance and power aligned. So I think there's no question. You don't have to ask, would they have been conservatives? Would they have been liberals? They believed, as they believed in an informed citizenry, they feared the combination of ignorance and power, and I think that says enough.
Ignorance and power, I think, is Trump's 2020 slogan, and it's going to be really so. I find, and last thing here before we wrap up, many have talked about Trump being Jacksonian, like Andrew Jackson, and Trump is a fan of Andrew Jackson, which is ironic. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about Andrew Jackson, if you can, and why people see Trump in Jackson or vice versa.
Well, you know, he has his picture, but I still think Steve Bannon told him to put the picture there, and he probably doesn't really know anything about Jackson. But Jackson at the time, he had very little political experience. I mean, as everyone has pointed out, I mean, he did serve in the military, but he carried a bullet next to his heart from a duel. So he was known for his duels, for killing someone in a duel. He carried a hidden sword in his cane, so he was known as blustering. He was, people were afraid that he was an autocrat.
You could plug my earlier book.
On Jackson.
And he was known for being extremely passionate, the passions of Andrew Jackson. So he was not seen as one who was level-headed. He didn't have, yes, he had legal training, but he didn't even recognize that, you know, the normal pattern of the three branches of the government. He assumed that the courts and the executive were co-equal branches, which really meant he was in charge.
Jackson was Trumpian in the sense that he believed that he imbibed the will of the people, that he automatically expressed the will of the people, that he didn't have to read or study. He just knew instinctively what was best for the people. And he rewarded loyalists. He gave them the best land when he was in a position to distribute land taken from Indians to his closest confidants. He promoted people who were not always the best educated or the best informed, but people who were loyal to him. Right. There you go.
Yeah, and the Jacksonian Democrats were all about expansion. I mean, they wanted the annexation of Texas, they wanted the war with Mexico, and essentially they wanted wealth that was going to go to people like Jackson, upstarts, slaveholders. This is kind of the group that they were backing, and they weren't. Jackson himself never advocated or supported any kind of real democratic reform. It really was the northern states. It was, you know, Martin Van Buren, who was kind of his electioneering guru, and then Pennsylvania. So the places in terms of promoting democracy, that was not something that Jackson could ever lay claim to, that he supported.
As far as I know, from my study, the first person to propose the popular election of the president was then Congressman, later mayor of New York City, Edward Livingston, in the early 1793, 94.
And one other irony is that it was John Quincy Adams. He was the first person to refer to our government as a representative democracy, not Jefferson, and not Jackson.
Did Jackson have a series of hotels named after him? He didn't have so look, I hope
towns.
Well, I hope, like Ron Cherno's book on Hamilton, this becomes a musical, The Problem of Democracy. There's a lot of it that rhymes with Adams, and it's pretty easy.
Right.
But I want to thank you. And again, the book is The Problem of Democracy. It's a brand new book by Nancy Isenberg and Andrew Burstein. It's a great book, great read. You learn a lot about our second president, also a lot about our sixth president, and the framers and what they thought. And on some level, it is it somehow makes me feel like what we're seeing now is not as grotesque and as ridiculous as it might have been when you look at the framers were fighting each other and using the media and everything else was going on. So thank you very much. It's great meeting you, and I really appreciate it. And thanks for watching now Salon Talks right here.